Hello, I'm Jennings. I'm a community engagement specialist at the Science Museum, and I am so pleased to introduce this community curator talk for the month of March. The community curator program is something that we developed in response to community listening sessions last year, where people mentioned that they wanted to take more of an active role in telling and interpreting stories of objects within the museum collections. So this year we are piloting this program in order to give people more of a voice and use the museum's resources to support their telling and interpretation of their own stories. This is the third talk. There will be 6, running monthly until June. The talk is being recorded, and a recording will be shared out at the end. So if you zone out and want to see what you missed, you can rewatch it. And that is all I have for now. If you have questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will curate a Q&A at the end. And yeah, take it away.
All right. Okay. Hopefully everyone can you all see my notes?
Nope.
No.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to start with briefly doing an acknowledgement, and then we're going to quickly transition through some talks about what we're planning. And then I think Ger and I might be switching the share screen because we have we've been working on different presentations about our practice. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to begin with the acknowledgement that we are settlers living in Minnesota Makoche, land that was stolen by white Americans. This is the ancestral land of the Anishinaabe and the Oceti Sakowin, or the 7 council fires, which consists of the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, or the Oyate. This land acknowledgement is important because as an American, it's important to remember that this nation was built on white supremacy and white settler colonialism that led to the genocide of Native Americans and enslaved African Americans. And we are still feeling the effects of this history today at large through racist policies, for example, and corrupt justice systems. And at the local level, we see it in racist deeds and the use of languages that erases Dakota and Anishinaabe sacred sites. If there's no justice, there's no justice if justice for Indigenous and Black communities are ignored. So for Ger and I, healing starts with the understanding that social justice is a shared responsibility. It's intersectional and a collective effort that really began from generations before us. What we see here is I screen captured a map from the Native Land .ca website, and this is, as they caution, not a map that dictates where the territories lies, where it draws territorial lines, but it gives a general knowledge, right, visual knowledge of where the nations reside. And in the pink purple is where the Oceti Sakowin is generally, where the ancestral lands are, and then the green, the highlighted green is where the Anishinaabe nation is residing, or where their ancestral lands are. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. So our presentation today is focused on our response to this pilot program that Jennings had introduced. It's Ger and I titled it "When is a Pot Not a Pot?" And the image that we see on the right is also a part of one of the things that we have to accomplish for this this program is to tour the collections and then we decided to respond to the collection, and I think we were prompted to select an item from the collection, but we opted to have our own items. And this display is something that the community curators have been engaging in, and this is currently up at the Science Museum. So we encourage you to walk into the lobby and take a look and spend some time with this installation. This is a close up that Jennings so gracefully sent us a screen capture. I mean, a photo of. We weren't able to get there before the installation went up. I think it was just installed on Monday. These are the items that we have chosen. And I'm sharing it for those who are not from Minnesota right now and they're not able to access that space. Okay, so this is the general overview of what we will be focusing on. We decided to structure this presentation on this general talk about Hmong objects and the use of objects in our individual practices. And then we'll be talking about our experiences with the Science Museum's collection, and then what we've learned through speaking with Rebecca, who is one of the conservators. And then we will share some memorable objects from the collection. And I will end my slide sharing, and then Ger will begin his presentation.
Sounds good. All right, let me see here. Can you see my screen? Everybody see my screen here?
Yes, we can see the
great.
screen and no notes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. All right, yeah, so my name is Ger Xiong. I first want to thank Dave for weaving me into this project. I think we shared similar ideas and kind of concepts, and we're kind of interested in some similar and kind of different things. So she, I think, kind of reached out and kind of weaved me into this project with her. So it's been really great kind of learning about our own practice and kind of sharing insights about the collections. It's been great to just kind of talk and communicate with one another about our thoughts and insights on collections in our own practice. So thank you again for that. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about my presentation, my artist practice, my artwork, and then go into some artist reference in relation to the collections, and then some collection-based work. So we'll start here. So my family, this is an image of my family and I. We came to the United States as refugees of the Vietnam War in 1993 and resided in Wisconsin, primarily around the Fox Cities area, if you're familiar. So like in Appleton, close to like Green Bay area. And this is my siblings. This little baby right here. Go next. I find objects in adornment really fascinating, and I think we learn a lot through them as we use them to carry them throughout our migration. So I've always been interested in objects for a while now. I studied metals and jewelry at the University of Wisconsin in Whitewater. So that's when I really began my kind of process in learning this practice and this making through the metal studio at the university there. And as I think we all know, they've been a way to kind of document our history and culture, and also forms of currency and spiritual protection. And I find that the migration and the duration of jewelry very fascinating, just metalwork in general, as it will probably outlast us and live on from generation to generation. So I find that really interesting in jewelry and metalwork objects. And so I utilize a lot of I utilize and find influences within the Hmong jewelry, and I utilize that a lot within my own work. And they've been a huge influence within my work, such as the forms, the symbols, and the process of making, the different ways to learn, narrate, and tell my own stories through these adornment and jewelry pieces. And a lot of these beginning work, when I was working through them, really kind of looks at absence and loss and grievance through like family losses from Laos to Thailand to United States. and chains at this time were, and I think it currently too, are really kind of a metaphor that connects one piece to another. And during this time, I was looking at materiality, sorry, not materiality, chain links and processes of making. So I was using chain links as a way to connect from one piece to another. And at this time, I was really looking at loss and absence, and finding what it means to connect to one person that I've never met before. So during the refugee camp, my father passed away before I was born. So when he passed, I was born and then we came to the United States that same year. A lot of this work was kind of grieving through what that loss means, grieving through what that absence means through Hmong jewelry, and using Hmong jewelry as a way to kind of navigate those relationships. Let me see. And then I became kind of interested. I began interested in textile for a little, textile as well. These are my mom's textile. She's also a maker, and she carried this along with her in the suitcase from the refugee camps when we came to the United States. I forgot how many suitcases we came with, but I think she carried this, and there's a few other ones too that she carried. I'll be showing two today, just as a way to kind of talk about the importance of some of these objects and the things that we carry along with us through our migration. Let's see. So see a lot of like applique work, reverse applique, I think cross embroidery work within some of these pieces. And I wanted to utilize some of the crafts that has been historically used within the Hmong history, and I'm really interested in the reclamation of identity, how to utilize craft as a way to talk about reclaiming identity. My mom noticed me embroidering this piece when I came home from my fellowship from Thailand, and she gave me a spool of her thread that she's kept since we lived in a refugee camp and carried along with her to the United States. So recently, being interested in materiality and the representation, its usage, I fully embroidered this copper sheet, crinkled it, kind of impacted it, kind of try to like pull it apart, and then re-stitch these cracks and crevices with their embroidery thread that my mom gave me. So you kind of see these blue threads that weaves throughout these cracks of the piece. And I before I made this piece, I think which is important to kind of talk about too. I was doing a fellowship in Thailand, and I saw a lot of the tourism industry there was really big, and the consumerism and commodification and commercialization of craft was something that I became really interested in when I was there. So I came back with this kind of high interest in how we consume commodified craft through the materials. And let's see. And yeah, when I was there, I saw a lot of massive amount of people selling Hmong craft throughout Thailand. Some of them are Hmong, some of them are not Hmong. And I was always been like curious on who's selling them, who's buying them, and how this craft continuously changes. And I began focusing on materials and objects we use in jewelry and textile and clothing. What are their representation and how I can kind of disrupt these dominant spaces. And I think many Hmong silversmiths were already doing this, melting down these French Indochina coins that were actually silver when they were in circulation, and then repurposing that into our jewelry. And I think that action and the power and process of making and melting the currency and creating jewelry out of it is really powerful. So I kind of wanted to replicate that within these now replicated French Indochina coins that we use within our jewelry, and disrupting them, drilling into them, cutting them apart, and then reattaching them through the cross embroidery process. And I shifted a little bit to some more textile work, based work, and was really interested in these Hmong tapestry and narrative work that really came from our time in the refugee camp. During that time, NGOs and Western folks were going through the camps and had a huge influence into our craft. They really thought about what was marketable and really told these makers what was marketable to the outside world, what was selling. what color combinations were marketable, what designs were more marketable. So a lot of this is like on an economic level, a lot of the craft changed and had a huge influence on these craft, and came upon these tapestries that were much more narrative, with visual narratives. Um, and I'm really interested in that narrative work. So I found these cassette tapes that was in my brother's duffel bags, and I started to listen to it. There are folk tales that my father told throughout them. So you listen to it, and he tells a few folk tales, I think, throughout this cassette tape. So side A and side B, and it was kind of the way of making to the process of making. I was listening to it while I was using a sewing machine to draw and embroider the design onto the piece. Um, and I think this gets back to when I was young too. I remember my mom really communicating. This is kind of the way before Facebook and all this social media. This is the way that my mom would communicate with our family back in Laos. So she would video record it sometimes, I think like 30 minutes, or I think top was like 60 minutes. I forget, but like 60 minutes recorded time to kind of talk about what our life here is like in the United States, and then sending that over to Laos. That process was really interesting to me. So this cassette tape kind of visually was fascinating and really interesting to me as how it becomes a form of communication through the object and through listening. Just some installation shot. You can listen to the audio, folktale. And then more into the tapestry work, I started to look at how I can look at the traditions of Hmong tapestries and narratives and explore more into our lifestyles within the United States, and how it's changes and how it's continuously kind of adapting to our environment. So I created this piece that you can take on and off the grid, wear it as a wearable brooch, creating different ways that represents, wearable brooch. You can take this on and off from one grid to another, changing the stories around each grid. And then as more and more gets lost, the story begins to lose its history. But the story really migrates with that person wearing the others for others to see, and then completely disappears. And when being put back on, what does it mean to recreate a narrative and a story? What does it mean to misplace some of these narratives? And trying to figure out how to kind of rebuild or build this story back up again, and what it means to whether it becomes the same story or a changed story. So it's kind of reversed there. This tapestry. So kind of going back into this wearable piece of a much larger story. These tapestry came as a way to tell stories of my own Hmong American history, as well as learning about my family's migration from Laos, Thailand, United States. So let's see. I find really, again, like the actions of placement and displacement really interesting in these work. Cutting apart, removing, wearing, replacing a part of a story into a bigger story, interesting. So this is a necklace that can be placed on and off of this piece. I question a lot of what happens when a part of a piece is removed to wear, carry along with the wearer. What does it create to the bigger picture, and then what happens when it comes back to refill that space. And growing up, assimilation plays a pretty big role in my work. I feel like growing up in Wisconsin, in a pretty predominantly white school neighborhood, like many Hmong folks, I think dealt with a lot of transition from school to home, home to school with these different places. And as a kid, my identity really shifted from Hmong to American, Hmong to English. And this work looks at the ways I've navigated being within this white spaces in the Hmong space. We were placed in English. I was placed in EL until like I think junior year of high school, which I found really fascinating because I feel like my English was pretty good by the time I was in much. I feel like it was much better than a lot of the non-Hmong students within the school. Yeah, being placed in this program. really kind of displaces my language and myself from other folks. And we really became translators at a very young age, translating documents like IRS documents, these government documents at a very young age. And it's a lot of work at like being only in the third grade or at a younger age to translate these documents, and then transitioning from school and then to work. I worked at McDonald's, so a lot of McDonald's come up a lot in my work. So I worked at McDonald's for almost 9 years, since I was 15 up until the end of my undergrad, which is like 2017. And a lot of it, this is like a thing that happened to me when I was working there at like 15 years old, and just sounding really white through a speaker when I was taking orders there. And at the time, I was really proud, this idea of like assimilated, like this not being Hmong was kind of this pride that I think I was very proud of at the time. And then, oops, sorry. And then going back home, having to work and having all these different parts of our lives shifted, and not wanting to be a part of these cultural values that my mom grew up with. And sorry, I kind of went on to the next slide, but I had like a precaution for the next slide because it has an image of a burial. So I'm gonna go to the next slide here. So this is our time in the refugee camp. We had a convenience store in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Not Chiang Mai, sorry, Chiang Kham, Thailand. And then this is my father's burial, who passed, like I said, in 1993, a month before I was born. At this time, when I came back, I usually whenever I go back to my mom's house, I look through our photo albums that are usually laying around, and kind of shift through them just to see like what was fascinating, just to see like what these images were. And I use them a lot with these tapestry work. So I created this work. This is the Hmong and Lao Refugee Deportation Prohibition Act of 2020 bill, introduced by Minnesota's U.S. Representative Betty McCollum. The bill quotes, to defer the removal of individuals to the Lao People's Democratic Republic for a 72-month period and for other purposes. So I wanted to put my father's death onto this bill because I feel like there's a lot of like betrayal in a way to be deferred back, or deferred back to Laos, even though a lot of us don't really have a connection to that space, and wanted to look at disposability of culture and history, and only to be deported back to a place that many of us may not have a physical connection with. So that's a shift to the community curator. That's my work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some artist reference here, just some interest here. I've always been interested in James Luna's work. So this is in response to the collection, right? So I've always been interested in his work, especially this artifact piece. It's a 1986 performance piece. It's performed by the artist, where he challenges the ways Native American art is displayed through contemporary American culture, and museums have displayed his race as extinct and vanished. He installs himself in a glass-like exhibition shape at the San Diego Museum of the Man in the section of the Indians who were once inhabited San Diego. So through this performance, he critiques and criticizes how museum displays Native people as vanished or living in the past. He is dressed in a leather cloth that has labels around him. And then also within this space, various contemporary objects and artifacts around this piece that relates to the living and developing culture of the Native Americans. And I think I'll talk about this a little bit later too, when we talk about the actual object itself, but I find that really interesting when we looked at the collections at the Science Museum. Talk a little about Sonia Clark here. She works within different mediums and constants, but the one I'm really interested in is Unraveling Unraveled, which consists of the Confederate flag, where the viewer become parts of the unraveling. of the flag. It's the three colors, the flag of its historical meaning, and being of African descent. By this performance, the audience becomes part of the unraveling of the flag. Each thread is unraveled by hand, and through the complication of unraveling by hand, creates a metaphor of combating racism, of our supremacy in our society, as well as persistence. And the more and more it becomes unraveled, the more skeletal it becomes, and more abstract it becomes. And I find this kind of deconstruction really fascinating. Yeah, and I think that's it for me. Yeah, I'll pass it over to Day.
Thank you, Ger. All right. I'm gonna figure out sharing again. All right. Oh boy. Oh, I'm gonna have to slide through your presentations.
Yeah.
Oh, great. I should have been keeping up. No. I'm afraid I might click on some of your previous work. Okay. Oh, I see your notes. Nope. Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. Again, I wanted to thank you all for joining us. My social media handles are here in case you're interested. My name is Dej Txiaj Ntsim Yaj. You can call me Kua or Day. I use the pronoun she, her, hers. Today I'm going to be talking about Home, J, which is an installation that I have. It's an installation series that started in, I want to say 2016. That's kind of been ongoing here and there. And mainly because this experience with the collection is very dominated by objects. And I don't identify as an object maker. I think about myself as someone who works with objects. I do sew clothing. However, I'm not confident enough yet to call myself an object maker. So it's going to take some time before I build some confidence for that. But my artistic practice, much like Ger's, interrogates Hmong history, identity, culture through multiple medias like drawing, paintings, textiles, photography, and performance. I find that a through line between all my projects is the subject of diaspora and displacement. And my process is more so autoethnographic than, and where I draw from my experiences to ask questions about larger collective history and culture. And I'm really focused on the home, not just being this place, this site, but this it shows up, I think, over and over again. Maybe not just in our traumas, but in our stories. And this displacement runs so deep in us that I do think about it as this inheritance or this. I wouldn't say it's a large part of me, but it's definitely one of those topics that consistently comes up. And this displacement doesn't just pertain to the physical home itself, but it's also I'm also thinking about it as a body being a container, right? A home for your soul, your spirit, etc. And so this installation, which I will continue to talk about, is really this exploration of displacement, and really trying to ask questions about how community, the Hmong community or my community, our community can collectively heal from this legacy of statelessness and displacement. Okay. However, I'm going to start with my drawing and painting series because I think this is where some of the objects, like the inspiration for finding objects, comes from. In 2009, I started a series called Hmong American Experience, series where I was paying closer attention to my family because I I think part of it was like growing up and much like Jer, experiencing a lot of microaggressions, um, and people are always asking me where I'm from, what I am, and etc. And I think I never took those questions very seriously, or sometimes I humor it and I try to answer it. But um, I think once I started my BFA program, I really dived into those questions. And a part of this drawing series was that I wanted to find a different way to represent Hmong that was not so solely focused on just the textiles, or the recreations of Hmong symbolism. Um, Something about Bandao feel at that time felt very violent, because I felt like it was just masking a lot of stories that just does not come to the forefront when it comes to the representation of Hmong. And so this series really begins with me documenting my family, and what I started to gravitate towards was more celebratory events such as healing ceremonies. And it became the focus of my documentation, because these are the moments where I find myself performing my identity, even among my relatives. And my parents also start to perform something slightly different that is not, like they're different when they're around relatives versus when they're just at home, coming home after work or something like that. Okay, and then I'm going to keep moving. This is a recent image of one of those gatherings. And it's through these photographs, my drawings and paintings work from these photographs, but it's also through these photographs that I became really aware of gendered roles. And at the time, it was not obvious to me how I was positioned in the household as a daughter, how women and girls were treated, and how patriarchal, this privileging of the male was like very, very prevalent in my family. And so I'm showing you this photo because I created this drawing in 2011, and this is a photograph from 21, and yet the men are still sitting at the table in my family. And this seems to be a very consistent occurrence when it comes to gatherings, where the women are in the background or seemingly almost blurred out of the image. This image was also part of the Kite ceremony, or the psych so-calling ceremony for my grandma. And I'm showing you because the title of our what do you call that, display is called When is a Pot Not a Pot? And here, kind of in the center right section of this image, is a pot, and this is a larger version of the pot that is in the display case. And I guess, when is this pot not a pot is the question about when an object loses its what it's intended for and it becomes a museum object, and what does that mean? These are images that I'm showing you because, I mean, they're still from the series, but I am also wanting to talk about the material and the way that I've been painting and drawing. And I didn't know at the time that I've been putting like the whole working in diptychs or working in multiple planes and collapsing them was something that has happened over time, because I come from a big family and didn't have space to make. And so I've noticed that over the years, because there's been so little space for me to explore or to do large work, I find myself creating on multiple planes or on things that are easily folded and collapsible. I find that to be the kind of method or practice that became a part of my installations. So this is the first iteration of J, which means home. I was initially just experimenting with ideas that were rattling in my head, like how do I create space for my work? When I say that, I'm thinking about how the white walls of the gallery really feels like it makes my work look like it needs a lot of context for an audience to engage in it. Or the white wall, I don't know if it's intimidating, but it just feels like that it's not the right kind, it's not the kind of environment that I was interested in when I display my work. And through installation, I was experimenting with trying to find a way to create a kind of threshold to really slow down and I don't know, display my work among a place where the colors were familiar, where the symbols spoke, my language, I think. And I wanted to use Joss paper because I thought about it as an item that is utilized throughout Asia. So I'm thinking, of course, about diaspora, right? Um, and then these are also it's also a material that is, sometimes sacred and yet mass produced. That was like a quality that I was interested in. I wanted to engage in spirituality and ritual, like that. I wanted to basically engage in this ancestral way of performing ritual, right? This knowledge of connecting through time, right? Extending myself into the past, to the present, and possibly the future through spirituality, through ritual. Um, and this installation was really taking small steps towards learning how to care, what care looks like. This is another iteration of the installation, and this was happened in 2017 in the MFA graduate, what is it? Yeah, the Master of Fine Arts graduate hallway. So this is where the graduate students have some of their studios, and this hallway was extremely intimidating. This is the first year that I started grad school, and it just the whole place just felt very sterile. The windows didn't open. It felt like a jail cell. Way better than a jail cell, but nothing was like it. Just I think I was just feeling a little out of place when I got to grad school, and so I took this installation to grad school, and I wanted to find a way to ground myself through ritual, and the installation became my way of caring, of trying to make a space where I can feel familiar and reorientate my body. This work is site adjusted. This is a collaborative work with Magnolia, who's a good friend and a dance scholar and dancer and choreographer. And we collaborated on this. I think it was a conference. Yes, it's a student conference with Northwestern University, and this installation was in Chicago at the Axis Lab, right underneath the train station. And I brought this piece there, and this was the first time that it left one of those a personal space, like a space that I was familiar with, and um, it was also located in like almost like the heart of like a Southeast Asian community. So up and down the streets, you'll have like restaurants and Southeast Asian grocery stores, which I think some of the places that my family visited when they had just moved to Wisconsin, and there were no places to find the kinds of foods that they wanted. And so the site felt in particular like really important to reclaim, right? Or to be in temporarily. Um, so before I began the installation, I cleaned the space. I physically cleaned the space, and I approach it like much like a ritual where I acknowledge the spiritual guardians of the area to make my presence known, and I let them know that I'm there temporarily and will leave without taking anything from their land. So this installation becomes this like site adjusted work where mm, it becomes this invitation for, of course, people to come in, but it's about bringing home, like, what does home look like in these places? And objects that I've collected really reminded me of my parents and their basements or my grandma's house and whatnot. This is the most recent iteration of J, and I titled this one Lao Lao, which means come, come. Uh, it's the ninth iteration of the series, and installation utilized, of course, objects that reminded me of home. However, I minimized a lot. After I moved out of my grad studio, I ran out of space for storage, and so I took what I can, and I couldn't collapse everything, and so this is what I was left with when I did this installation. Um, and I think at the ninth iteration, I began to really formulate words for J. And I think about, I have initially approached this installation more as experimental. So it's like I didn't quite have words to talk about what it is about, because sometimes it's like, I don't know. I don't know everything. I'm just doing. Um, this is one of those projects where I was just doing. And I think at this iteration, I was able to really, it was able to really ground me in this idea that it's much like an ongoing healing ritual, where I've been thinking a lot about things like home beyond just my parents' home, but this larger collective history, Hmong history of displacement and American imperialism, right? I'm creating these spaces to imagine how to heal. And obviously, I think like the most noticeable thing about these installations is the absence of the Hmong body, right? And the shoes become the stand-in for their bodies, right? The suggestion of a body. The words lao intentionally engages in this like ancestral spirituality, particularly in the practice of Gaing. Gaing is a practice of chanting, right? You're speaking from the heart, you're coaxing the souls and the spirit to comfort them, to ask them to return home. All right, this is going to be a hard transition. That is the end of my engagement with objects. All right, and we're heading to the about the collection. Okay. All right, so while we were working, looking through the collection, the information that we gathered was mostly through the conversations with Rebecca, who's one of the main contacts for us. And as we've learned that Jan Folsom is the initial collector of this collection. She was working in a Ban Binai camp to market crafts and needlework and handicrafts to basically to influence and teach the refugee population there to make sellable crafts to sell to the Western Hemisphere. And a lot of these items were obtained in 1988. We know that there are probably over 800 objects, and the majority of these objects date from the 1980s to the early 2000s. And the majority of the things that we saw were, I don't know, I guess they were pretty mundane. They're like things that you would find in a Hmong house, even in an American or a Western Hmong house. Jared, feel free to chime in. Like we saw items that were like, oh yeah, you can totally get that from the Asian market.
Yeah, I think that's what like our initial like kind of response or reaction to like opening the drawers were like, especially when we decided on like when is a pot not a pot. We kind of really look at these everyday objects that lived in my like cupboards, using it to cook my ramen, and sitting in these different space feels really different and really kind of, it seems like, I think it goes back to like when I was presenting on James Luna, when it's in that space, it seems like it's very historical and it has this idea of death to it, but yet a lot of us are still using a lot of these objects in these craft in our everyday, and we see it too pretty often.
Oh my gosh, actually we should just go here, huh?
Yeah, you can go back if you want to talk about
okay
it.
Yeah, I put the slide in here because I chose not to talk about other artists that I was inspired. I mean, other artists who have engaged in the museum or in objects in a really unique way. I initially learned about the Science Museum's collection when I was doing research for my installation J or House, right? I was intrigued by um, how does a Hmong house look like and what it's like, how is it built? And um, I had a few conversations with my grandma, and she often spoke about the permanence of the home that she grew up in, and that her house was wood, right? That it was really big, that it's bigger than the homes that are that that they're living in today in America. Each room had its own name. There were functions, right? And when those kinds of homes and the architecture is no longer there, then what becomes of that knowledge, right? Like that language almost completely disappears from our everyday, the way we communicate what home is. Um, and so through Google search, I found an article about the Hmong Odyssey exhibition, where the Science Museum worked with Hmong elders and other Hmong community members to build a historically before the Vietnam War Hmong home, where everything was built from wood. There were no nails. Everything was put together by wooden pegs and twill and other forms of like connection. And I thought that was like really interesting. And at the time, I considered contacting the museum, but I've had really bad luck with contacting museums to visit their collections, so I just left it as is. But somehow I met Jennings, and we were able to to be a part of this pilot program. So it's doing some weird full circle for me now, which is creeping me out. And this image is an image still from the Science Museum's Hmong House video documentation, where the museum has I would say it's a pretty decent sized digital collection of a variety of things like Hmong people weaving, batik, elders speaking and playing the thing. And so this whole process of building the home was also documented. What else?
Mhm.
Yeah. Did you?
Yeah. What was that? Did you want to talk about this? Let's
Yeah, I can start it. I mean, while we were looking through the collection with Rebecca, who was the main conservator we spoke with, we also started noticing that there's somebody named Su Tao who is like showing up in the collections database, where all the information about these items are categorized, and where the researchers or conservators can access. And Su Tao did a lot of the cultural translation and commentary in some of the descriptions for these objects. And Su Tao also accurately titled these objects, right, in Hmong. And so that was like really nice to see. And it was basically a very serendipitous experience to learn about someone who is probably much older now, working with a museum, doing like pretty important work, but not like officially like acknowledged for that labor, which was like really interesting. But Rebecca mentioned that Su Tao did talk about a moment where he was explaining to somebody. I see Rebecca in the in the audience, but yeah, I think she tells the story better because I was not there to witness it. But basically, Su Tao was explaining to a Hmong elder about how they can't just go to like grab something off of the exhibit, because that Hmong house that we just talked about was at the time in the 90s a permanent exhibition, right, in the Science Museum. And so that was quite interesting, where Su Tao was explaining thanks, Rebecca. um where Suta was trying to explain to an elder what is a museum object, right? When does an object lose its cultural relevance or the way it's been utilized, right? Its function and how somebody, I don't know, from a different background would understand it, and that it becomes an object that just sits there
Yeah.
for people to gaze upon, right? And this is, the photo, and they took that conversation and put it into the museum, which was interesting. All right.
It was great, Dave. I'm not sure if I have anything else to add to that, but yeah.
I tried. We also learned, because I'm trying to learn about these people, because I'm like, how do we get in contact with them? I would love to know more about them. And it's just he probably is living somewhere in Florida enjoying his life. But we also learned that he was an Eagle Scout, one of the first Hmong Eagle Scouts in Minnesota. And I when Rebecca mentioned that, I knew exactly what that was, because I happened to have a Time magazine of this photo of this Eagle Scout in the National Geographic, because I collected National Geographics for a moment, and I just thought I'd share this like really young photo of Zhu Tao. I think he's like in the bottom right, right? It looks
Yeah.
like him in the front. The names weren't included. Wah wah. Okay, we've confirmed that's him. But yeah, this was like there's this weird full circle thing that's happening, but I just thought it would be really interesting to share.
Yeah. I think like going back to like the names, I feel like when we were like looking through, I think when I think about the objects, I think a lot of like the Hmong names are really shown within some of the work that they do. So I feel like sometimes when I saw Sue's name, it's really great to kind of give like a face and a name to some of the images that are often not like named, like who these people are. So I think acknowledging names and acknowledging the work that they do within that work is really great, because I don't hear it often.
Oh gosh. Oh, okay. We skipped a lot. What happened? There we go. Oh, did we lose a chunk of?
No,
Okay. No, this is right. Okay.
yeah, I think these are just some questions that came up when we were having our conversation. You know, I'm not sure if I like have any really answers to these, but I think just more questions to kind of think about. Um, as we kind of shuffle through the drawers, we saw a
Oh,
lot of
sorry.
familiar. I think you keep going.
Okay.
Just as I talk, a lot of familiar stuff and some things that I think I already said, but like we use in our everyday life, and are sometimes tucked away in our drawers, sometimes tucked away in our cabinets that we often used. So some of these just images of what we found interesting. Um, let's see, what else did I say? Um,
Should I keep
and
going?
yeah, keep going. Yeah. And then as for me, I really have interest in objects with their history and relationship to the land and space, and also to the relationship of people. So seeing these objects, let's see. Yeah, you can keep going. I think we can just go to the next one.
Mhm.
There we go. Some majority work. Yeah, I like this one. So these are the pots. Now when
Oh yeah.
we open this pot, yeah, it's back there, right? I think when we open this pot, it's just kind of like I think we had like a little like live like what is this doing here? I feel like it's like a pot. Like when I saw this pot, I was like, I have this exact like replica, I think, in my cabinet, and I use it to cook soups and all my dishes. Um, and then this left image, I just find it really fascinating, just the resourcefulness among folks, just using materials surrounding them and utilizing that into our everyday objects as a tool or as a material, whether it's something like a dead battery outer thing, or just whatever they can find around them. I think it's really great.
These are the images that I thought were really interesting. I mean, these were the objects that I thought were really interesting in the collection. Um, Jer and I intentionally chose not to do too many textile focuses. I think it's not that we think it's really important, but there's just such a saturation of Hmong textiles that I was really enamored by all the handmade tools and the use of wood and bamboo, right? And the different kinds of vegetation that shows up, right? And in like Hmong, what is Hmong, right? What is a Hmong object? And so, but these are some of the interesting textiles that I was finding interest in, because there's like this mixing of um weavings, right? These weavings that I don't patterning that I don't think is Hmong. I'm not a textile specialist. It could be Mien, it could be Aka, it could be another like ethnic tribe or group that lived nearby. Maybe this household is, maybe this slash might just be Mien. I'm not even sure. Like when I'm looking at it, I keep questioning what that is. I don't recognize it because I'm limited by my knowledge. And see, I think that was like some of the experiences that we had with this collection is like, I wish I had brought an elder with me, or I don't know, my mom, someone smarter who's had more experience with some of these materials. Because I was raised in the US, so it's like I have no lived experiences around some of these objects. But I really thought that this was interesting because these are from the 80s, and I find it intriguing because I have a project where I wear Hmong every day, and I've had people police my body, and yet here we have Hmong clothes that have been mixing with other people's textiles, for quite a while, it seems, and people have been innovating and doing different things with it, and nobody's telling them they're less Hmong. I'm gonna keep going. Oh yes, this is one of my favorite objects, is the Pier 1 Imports bamboo. I don't remember what that project was for, but based on our conversations with Rebecca, the conservator, it seems it was a project where bamboo was needed, and the Hmong community member couldn't find bamboo, locally, like in the forest or anywhere. So they found it at the Pier 1 Imports, and here it is in their collection. And I felt like that was like the most relevant object of, I guess, a Hmong American experience, right? What is it like to be, so far away from the place in which your knowledge functions, right? And the livelihoods have all kind of just, you've been taken and plopped into a land that's completely just so different. And it's I don't know, I can't imagine what that's like. I don't want to actually, but this bamboo was like something that was quite intriguing and kind of the butt of the joke, I guess, with her and I, this whole collection is like, what else? Oh yeah, and I wanted to add these images because the image on the right is like a steamer. It's and I knew what that was because my grandma used to steam rice out of a rice steamer just like that. It's a hollowed out like trunk. And then what catches the rice in the center of the steamer is what do you call that? I don't, it's not a drainer. It's a thing with holes. I'm losing words. But something catches the rice and drains the rice. And so you'll put that on top of like a boiling pot, and it'll steam rice, and the rice is always good when it's steamed in wood. And then the image on the left is what is it? I thought it was a fishing pole at first because you see the front of the fishing pole, but I think Rebecca said, well, I mean, based on the database, it said it was something it was like a trap, right? An animal trap
Yeah.
that somebody created, which I thought was like really interesting. And the body, it looks like the body of that pole. I don't know if that's bamboo or that's wood. I don't remember, but that was like a really interesting handmade contraption. It's just like such a mixture of materials that I don't know, would never have thought, but I have no knowledge of. All right, and we're at the end. I want to say thank you, Science Museum of Minnesota, for creating this pilot program. It's been an interesting experience. Rebecca Newberry, who's the director of collection stewardship, she's the main person we've been having great conversations with. Jennings, who I so appreciate, because if I have not gone to the the meetings, the initial meeting that they had to get more information from the community, I don't think I would have known about this pilot program. JM, who was the main exhibit developer, and so JM was played a big part in the what would you call that? The exhibiting of the case and executing of placement. I'm not quite sure how that came about, but this is the first time that I was not involved in an installation of my own object. So, and then is it Elias? Yeah, Elias, who's the graphic designer who did help coordinate and put the designs together for the little bio that is on display, and then Su Tao, who we think is the cultural translator for the metadata and object description. Yeah, right. I'm gonna stop my share.
Well, thank you both so much. This was an incredible talk. We have a little bit for Q&A if there's questions from the audience. If not, I have the ones that I planned beforehand. I'll start off and give you all some time to. Oh, okay. In the chat, Shira mentioned that NGOs had an influence on art made in refugee camps, putting a focus on what was considered marketable. In your own work, how did you find yourselves choosing what colors or materials to use? Were there choices that felt mostly intuitive / aesthetic versus more deliberate or more symbolic?
Yeah. So I think with my own work, I try to I use a lot of more like the vibrant, like fluorescent colors that are pretty, you kind of notice it within the Hmong textiles. And I usually alter between like some of those colors and also like Americana colors. So I use a lot of I use Green Bay colors, green and yellow sometimes, McDonald's color, a lot of these fast food place coloration and mixing between them. Yeah.
And I know that we constrained you pretty heavily with the physical case itself. So with more space to display things, more time, are there other things that you would have liked to include that you didn't get a chance to?
Sound and video. Yeah, we just never got to it. I think that was a very difficult part of that little space. And also, I don't know, I think, and now that like having visited the actual, what do you call that area, that foyer, the entry
Lobby.
area? Yeah, the lobby, it's very loud and chaotic. So yeah, given more time, I think it might have been like a different project, but yeah.
I remember talking, I think COVID had a big deal. I think COVID had a deal because
Yes.
headphones, we were thinking about headphones, but I think COVID was something to consider too. So I think, yeah, audio or video would have been really nice. So kind of, yeah.
What else?
Other questions from the audience?
Oh.
Or other things you'd like to include?
Oh yeah, we dreamed up a huge installation, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. There is a mat that's Day has a mat that we included within the exhibition. I think a lot of that has to do with thinking about that space when we are around the installation. I don't know if yeah.
Yeah, I think we were just interested in, I don't know, really pushing the idea of museum objects, and I guess what is art, right? When does something become art? What is an object? How do people experience this? And how do you create a space within a space?
Yeah.
But yeah, experimenting just to see what happens.
Yeah. Other audience questions, comments? No comments. You're not allowed to make comments.
I looked up the Pier 1 bamboo in our database just now, and it was so Sue Tao and Tim Reddy, who was the anthropology department person, were working with someone, a Hmong hunter, who wanted to show a fire making kit. So that's what all that bamboo is for a fire making kit. No mention of the Pier 1 sticker whatsoever in the catalog record. So obviously that's how they could source bamboo in St. Paul.
Nice. Yeah.
Another question in the chat. Did you have a chance to view any of the video recordings of the house or other things?
Yeah, I started looking very, very quickly through some of the videos of the house making process, and that was really interesting. So far it's been interesting. I'm like I'm finding that the video quality is not that great, but you can still make up a lot of stuff, and I really like the conversations that these men are having as they're as they're like chopping away with a Hmong knife. I think that was like the most intriguing thing, is like all the tools that they're using were also made by them, and there's a video of them making those tools, like forging it, and then what is it? Yeah, so it was really interesting to see that, and to see the kinds of conversations that come about as they're creating. And it looks like it took a really long time to make. I saw it maybe 2 or 3 months with the video recordings, and I think somebody asked if they could make another one for the Wilder as a permanent site, like a permanent thing, and the person said no right away. And so it's like very labor intensive, and that makes a lot of sense, because like if you're just making a replica for people to see, I don't know, sometimes there's no heart in it. But you know, if you're making a house or a dwelling for you to live in and to care for, it's a different kind of enthusiasm, right, for that material and how they go about making something. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Another question in the chat, a clarifying question: who currently owns these items? Can I ask a clarifying question about the clarifying question? Which these items, the ones that are on display, or the pieces of the Hmong house, or something else entirely? Feel free to unmute as well if that's easier to ask the question. Oh, the ones in the museum collection. Okay.
The museum owns it.
Okay, science owns it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the objects from the collection are owned by the museum. The Hmong house was donated to the Hmong American Partnership, so it still exists as far as I know, but we didn't catalog it, so we didn't keep it. And they expressed an interest in holding on to it, so they have that. Everything else is yours or from other places.
All right. Well, Dej and Ger, any closing thoughts you'd like to deliver?
I don't think so. I don't have any. Yeah, I don't have any.
Fair enough.
I mean, yeah, it's been a trip.
Well,
I'll withhold from comments. And, yeah.
well, thank you both so much for an incredible talk, and thank you all for coming. If you missed the beginning or the middle or any other part of the talk, I will send out the recording of it as soon as it is done processing. And if you'd like to stop into the museum to see the display, it is in the museum lobby, directly to the right. It will be there until April 2nd, and you don't even have to pay for admission to see it. And other than that, I thank you all for coming. I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.